And greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova. It's still a little chilly here in Northern Virginia, so that's why I'm wearing my hoodie. Greetings to everyone who's joining me this late night. It's been a long day, but there have been many things on my heart. I actually wasn't planning to do a stream today, but I saw a video yesterday that gave me it really did shake me up. It gave me a lot of pause. So welcome everyone to this channel. For those of you not familiar with this channel, special greetings to you. This channel is devoted to exploring evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. The audience tends to be a little bit on the sciencey and nerdy side. That's because that's kind of who I am, and we cater a lot to students of science, especially those who are in graduate school or professional researchers. I'm pleased to say many people, highly educated up to the PhD level, and or medical doctors or dentists, all sorts, visit this channel. And so that's kind of what you might be in for. That being said, there's an outreach really also to just the ordinary person. And I'd like to think I'm an ordinary person. It's just that I have certain specialties in the areas of science. This channel, really me, promotes the evangelical Christian faith with some Reformed leanings. And I am a young earth creationist, but many times I will assume for the sake of the argument that the universe is old and that there might even be, that there's common descent. That's just for the sake of argument. I used to be a theistic evolutionist. That is, I believe God used evolution to create the life we see today. But then I became an old earth creationist shortly after about 2 years after I became a Christian, and believed that God used a miraculous act to create life. But I accepted the old ages. As I went off to graduate school in physics, I actually became a young earth creationist when I saw the various theories out there that really were no more outrageous than any other idea in in Christendom, as far as origins and even eschatology. That is how the universe will end. So that's kind of when I began to entertain belief in a young earth, young cosmos. Of course, I totally understand if people say, well, maybe I don't have to commit to a viewpoint and just wait and see. And I totally respect that. That just wasn't how things panned out for me. I said, well, maybe I'd like to just accept by faith that it is, and then look to see how much evidence I could gather that might confirm that. Over the 40 years that I've studied the issue, I've become more and more convinced that the Earth, the fossil record, the solar system, and the universe are young. And the reason that's of interest to the idea of finding evidence to confirm the Christian faith is that would lend credence to a literal reading of the genealogy of Jesus Christ in Matthew chapter 1 and in Luke chapter 3. And if that lends evidence to the literal reading, then it would indicate that these are historical documents, and that would lend forcefully to the idea that the Christian scriptures are inspired, divinely inspired, and that everything it says is from the mouth of God. Now, of course, the Lord could have made his presence as obvious as the air we breathe. It says in Proverbs 25:2, It's the glory of God to conceal a matter. It is the glory of kings to search out a matter. And so it's to God's glory to sometimes hide things from us. It's to our glory to search it out. I think if you read First Corinthians chapter 1, it says God sometimes will make something look foolish and it turns out to be true. And that gives him the glory because humanity has a tendency to think they know better than God and that they have the answers and they've got it figured out. And so sometimes God will conceal his, well, actually, oftentimes he'll conceal his existence and just see how people, will go about their lives. And when they hear the gospel, they'll just, they'll ignore it and disregard it and think it's foolishness. But that's kind of God's way of humbling people. And so just take it for what it's worth, that the path to truth sometimes is difficult enough that you have to exert some effort to find it. God generally does not hand it to us on a silver platter. There have been times, according to the Bible, where people like Paul would be on the road to Damascus and he'll just show up and kind of intrude on someone's life. And that does happen. For myself and for actually many of the people in the audience here, because I know some of you, God is real in your life because we've seen his action in our lives. We've been witness of answered prayer and miracles. As I've studied science more, I'm quite convinced that abiogenesis could not have happened naturally. If anyone has watched the James Tour series, that very powerful arguments. In my lifetime, the case for the origin of life, what we call abiogenesis, started off with I was watching Jacob Bronowski and they're advertising the Urey Miller experiment as how life began, and it looked like we were going to solve it. But I wasn't long before I started hearing eminent scientists like Fred Hoyle. Do I have his book here? I have his book. Fred Hoyle is an atheist. He wrote the book Mathematics of Evolution, and there was also Francis Crick. Both Fred Hoyle and Francis Crick had different views about how life got here, but they were invoking extraterrestrials. So we first started with naturalistic origins on Earth, then extraterrestrials, and then now in the present day, they're invoking multiple universes. Eugene Koonin, one of the top evolutionary biologists on the planet, wrote a paper to that effect. We covered another one that was published in Nature Scientific Reports on this channel that also invoked multiple universes. So at that point, how is invoking God any more outrageous than invoking multiple universes you can't see, test, or ever know or verify? Some scientists now are resorting to things that are totally unscientific, and yet the idea of God is far from them. I got this book as a recommendation from a theistic evolutionist. It's Measurements in Time Reversal in Objective Quantum Theory. Now, this did motivate me to study quantum mechanics in graduate school. And depending on how there are various interpretations to quantum mechanics, but he says here, let me see if I could find it. It's a beautiful passage. We thus see how quantum theory requires the existence of God. Of course, it does not ascribe to God, defined in this way, any of the specific additional qualities that the various existing religious doctrines ascribe to God. Acceptance of such doctrines is a matter of faith and belief. So here it is from a book on quantum mechanics, and just, yes, this is quantum mechanics. And, this is very compelling that a science book, and this is almost what I just quoted was just like one paragraph in this book of otherwise just pure science and mathematics and physics and quantum mechanics. And so where was I going with that? I was giving reasons why I believe personal miracles, answered prayer, and then certain interpretations of physics, quantum mechanics. I took cosmology in graduate school. And let me just read a passage here. During the 1950s and 1960s, the Big Bang and steady state models battled for supremacy. Critics of steady state model pointed out that the continuous creation of matter violates mass energy conservation. Supporters of the steady state model pointed out that the continuous creation of matter is no more absurd than the instantaneous creation of the entire universe in a single Big Bang billions of years ago. And so here, even in a graduate level cosmology class, there is a mention of something that just violates accepted understandings of physics, and it's a miracle. Of course, they don't use that word, but one starts to get the sense that the creation story is not any more absurd than anything else out there. I just pointed out in my quantum mechanics book that it implies there's a God. So who are we to say how God will decide to do things? Now let me read from, let's see if I have it here. It might be one of the later chapters on inflation. And I've mentioned this a few times. Let me read part of this theory. At some point, the visible universe was, it says here, page 201 of this book on cosmology. Immediately after inflation, in this model, all the mass energy destined to become the hundreds of billions of galaxies we see today was enclosed within a sphere only 6 feet across. The hundreds of billions of galaxies we see today was enclosed within a sphere only 6 feet across. And when this thing inflated, it was moving at thousands, millions of times the speed of light. And of course, that should be a little bit disconcerting for those who study relativity. And they said, well, the exception is that you're inserting space in between matter, therefore you don't violate relativity. And I'm like, yeah, right. Okay, so what evidence do you have that this mechanism actually took place? And it didn't surprise me that when I was feeling that you're just making stuff up, that's kind of the current complaint, including by Nobel Prize winners, recent one, Sir Roger Penrose. So I'm like, okay, if you can get galactic amounts of matter to start moving apart from each other at speeds faster than the speed of light by thousands or millions, how's that any more outrageous than a variable speed of light theory, which was actually the secular world put it forward. A minority of scientists said, well, that's a lot better than the inflation model. We could solve a lot of the problems with Big Bang cosmology if we invoke variable speed of light. And it turns out variable speed of light would also help young Earth creationism, because they're the two major problems that young Earth creationists will admit. It's how starlight from far away could reach us in less than 6,000 years. Some people have invoked created light, but good theologians and just the common person would say, well, why would God put light there to describe events that never happened? It doesn't make sense. We would expect God, if God wanted to communicate to us that the universe is young and to affirm his word, that he would not do that. He would put markers in the universe to tell us that the universe is young. So that is actually somewhat of a testable prediction and kind of a quasi-prophecy, if I may say, that if it looks like the speed of light would force us to an old universe, it's predicting that in principle we could discover evidences that will show the speed of light actually is variable. So this is on the table. I've been looking at variable speed of light theories. They're interesting. I've actually carried out experiments with the Cahill interferometer. I got inconclusive results, but I think things are moving forward on that front, albeit slowly, and it'll take acts of providence to make that feasible. A professional cosmologist by the name of, I'm just going to throw out some names here. Okay, I'm not saying I agree. I definitely don't agree. But let me just throw out some names. Luke Barnes, who is a respected Christian. He's a professional cosmologist, a physicist. He recently, and I think I don't know if I haven't, I'm going to check. I'll put it in the video description. He came out with an idea in a secular peer-reviewed paper on one-way speed of light in a Milne universe. That sounds very familiar. It echoes Jason Lisle, a young Earth creationist. Now, Luke Barnes is not a young Earth creationist. There are, I think that'd be a good paper to read. I think in some ways it would show why maybe Jason Lisle could be wrong. I think he is. Right? That's just my view. This one-way speed of light was the rage, but I actually think because of some experiments, there are ways you can actually find out if there's one-way speed of light, starting with the Heffel-Keating experiment that took airplanes with cesium beam atomic clocks and flew them different directions. And I think extending that to a thought experiment, you could see that we could indeed measure if there's a one-way speed of light. And I don't think it works the way Jason Lisle thinks. But I just needed to throw that out there. Some talented people are looking at the question. Maybe they don't come up with the right answer, but the talent pool is growing, which is encouraging. Another one is P.W. Dennis. P.W. Dennis worked for NASA as a contractor. And if you read some of his works, anyone who studied general relativity would be very, very impressed. He would not be hired by NASA and given awards if he weren't capable. He also has published in the Physical Review Letters of the American Physical Society, which is the premier physics journal and society. He's no joke, but he's a young Earth creationist. Also, I should mention John Gideon Hartnett, who has a different view than P.W. Dennis, but he's also an excellent physicist. He builds sapphire-controlled clocks, perhaps the most precise timekeepers in the universe, and they would be good for testing the fundamental constants in the universe. And I can imagine some interesting experiments that could be done. Let's see, there was a book I wanted to read from. The Matter Myth. Speaking of relativity, The Matter Myth is by an agnostic scientist, Paul Davies. And there is a funny account here just to talk about general relativity. There is an amusing story about Sir Arthur Eddington, who in the 1920s and 30s was Britain's leading expert on Einstein's theory of relativity. Eddington was asked to comment on the rumor that there were only 3 people in the world, by implication himself and Einstein, who properly understood the theory. There was a long pause before Eddington replied slowly, "I wonder who the third person is." That's just to highlight the complexities of relativity theory. So why have I put this on the table today? I have often said one of the flaws, or one of the things both old Earth creationists and young Earth creationists who are Christians and who take the Bible very seriously is the question of eschatology. Jesus said we will see disturbances in the heavens. Some of this is described also in the book of Revelation. How can we see disturbances in the heavens? If it's happening supposedly in somewhat real time with just a little bit of delay, if we are watching it unfold, wouldn't that suggest that the speed of light can travel fast across large distances that are many quote unquote light years away? But somehow the speed of light can go very fast between point A and B. But once it gets close to the Earth, it slows down. So let me just try to read a passage here from Revelation 6. Oh, before I go on, I may comment after. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole. I'm a classical millennialist. And that means I don't believe in a pre-tribulation rapture. That will have just minor bearing on most of what else I'd like to share today. Let me make sure I have the right web page up. Okay, hang on. So how do I read eschatology or the book of Revelation in particular? I tend to just read it sequentially. That I would say by and large, as I go from chapter 1 to the final chapter of Revelation and the final chapter of the Bible, I would just say, I think this is laying out how the world will end in chronological order. Not everyone reads it that way, but let us suppose that we're reading it in chronological order. So I'm just going to say, okay, if for nothing else, let's just say, for the sake of argument, that this is in chronological order, and there is some level of a modest literal reading of this. So we have heard about the seals being broken that were around the scroll. This is actually a beautiful passage, and just in the interest of time, I won't read it all. So let me bring it up. When he opened the 6th seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and every one, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the mountains and rocks, "Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come." So some comments here. on that passage. Let me see if I could. Some comments here on that passage. When it said the stars fell to the earth, I said, okay, I nearly lost my faith over that statement. I said, the stars are so much bigger than the earth. There's no way they could fall to the earth. And I said, this looks like just someone with a very primitive understanding of how the cosmos is organized and the relative sizes of the bodies, et cetera, et cetera. And he's just making a story up. And I nearly lost my faith over this. Now, as I said, because of some things that have happened to me personally, I began to entrust myself to the Christian faith. I've known people that have come to faith because of miracles in their lives. This does raise the issue, why does God work miracles in some people's lives and not in others? And, I get that is a theological complication. But to my brothers and sisters who are listening, you know what I mean. If God has revealed himself somehow in your life and done something, you're responsible for walking your life a certain way from that point on, because God's really trying to reach out to you, and may the Lord give you the incentive to continue to follow him. It says in Hebrews, if you've heard his voice, don't harden your hearts. So I nearly stumbled with this passage, and one of my co-hosts, Rebecca, is here. So let me just read this passage again as this relates to young earth creationism. And some other people have joined, like Pigs Can Fly. So this is from Revelation chapter 6. When he opened the sixth seal, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth, as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. Then the kings of the earth, and the great ones, and the generals, and the rich, and the powerful, and every one, slave and free, hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling to the rocks and to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who was seated on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? So this event, the earthquake and the stars falling to earth, signaled that there's a God and he really means business. Prior to me studying physics, this did not have the significances. And as I said, it nearly broke my faith, because I said, the earth is puny compared to the stars. No way all the stars in the world could fall and land on earth. And you can try to make some sort of figurative thing, and it still didn't quite work. But the word two in the Greek here is ice, spelled E-I-S, or in the Greek, it's epsilon iota sigma, which we can semi-transliterate into English as E-I-S, ice. It generally means to or into, but there are a few times in the New Testament it's properly translated toward. So it says in the New Testament, this man, he looked to heaven. He looked to heaven. That means toward. Toward. If the stars started to move toward the earth, then that problem that nearly broke my faith is resolved. The other thing is in later passages in Revelation, it talks about the stars still in the sky. So clearly they didn't land on Earth. They moved toward the Earth. So how could this be? I mean, why would this be a sign? And as I said, in my graduate level cosmology book, they talk about the stars are moving away from us. That was why the Big Bang Theory came to be, was we were trying to explain what the meaning of the stars moving away from us in all directions. Wherever you look, the stars are moving away from us. That's what they call the cosmological redshift. And I'll say it appears they're moving away from us. There is a growing debate whether that cosmological redshift indicates actual motion. So what is a redshift? Just briefly, when you're hearing a train or vehicle that's moving fast approaching you, it has a high-pitched sound, and when it's moving away, it has a lower-pitched sound. It's the Doppler effect for sound. You can extend this with some mathematical modifications to deal with, like, say, police radar guns. So when the police fires his radar at you and you're moving away from him, the radar beam bounces off your car. It comes back to him, and it has what they call a redshift. That means, on the light spectrum, red means kind of lower and blue is higher. That redshift means the wavelengths got longer, and therefore you in that car is moving away. By way of extension, and again, with a little bit of mathematical sophistication to apply this to cosmological objects, there is a cosmological redshift that we presume all the stars are moving away from us at some velocity. Now, this does pose other problems, and I pointed out, I've appealed to this book a few times. Hang on, let me see if I have it here. Do I have it here? The universe spreading out like that. This is my book. Hang on. This is my undergrad professor, supplementary quantum mechanics, Dr. James Trefil. He's also a famous author. He wrote the book, The Dark Side of the Universe. He pointed out that the universe spreading out like that is incompatible with the formation of galaxies and their various structures. This is a big problem, and many would say it's still unresolved. He said, by all accounts, the galaxy shouldn't be there. So dark matter was part of the solution for explaining this, and so far we haven't confirmed it. There's going to be an experiment coming up, 2037, that may help confirm it, that has to do with gravitational lensing. Oh, before I forget, Mr. Jetty89 and others who typed in the side chat before the show starts, I don't know how YouTube or whatever decides to preserve comments and delete it. I don't do that. Even my comments get deleted, and I'm the owner of the channel. So sometimes we'll have a discussion in the side chat before the show starts, and then when the show starts, it disappears. Sometimes it stays. I don't know what causes that. But I'd put a lot of links to things like what I had just mentioned. So where was I? So let's say, how would we know that the stars are moving to Earth? So, because it says in that passage in Revelation, the stars fell toward Earth. I'm just gonna presume that is the proper reasonable English translation. It didn't fall to Earth, but rather toward. If we started to see the blue shifts, that would mean that they're moving toward us, but that would also indicate the universe is starting to fall apart. The laws of physics as we know them are now changing. The entire universe now is about to blow apart. Why would I read that passage in Revelation that way? Okay, so remember, this By this point, God is already starting to pronounce, send plagues and famine and wars onto the earth. And he's going to show this big sign of the stars falling to earth, or I say toward earth. What is the reaction? All the mighty men, the kings, the slaves, the generals, the great ones, powerful, everyone hid themselves in the caves and rocks in the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the wrath of the Lamb. And I've tried to say, in modern Christianity, we try to portray Jesus as being such a nice guy that we need to love him. This is a picture of Jesus, the Lamb of God, someone who's so fearsome people will beg the mountains to fall on them, to be crushed, to have their bodies destroyed, because that would be more tolerable than facing Jesus Christ, who at this point is full of wrath. When we see descriptions of Jesus in the book of Revelation, it describes him as having eyes full of fire. He really means business. Why would it be that all these sinful people, for a brief moment, will start to bow down to the Christian God this way? I'm interpreting that those signs are so powerful, and it's very meaningful now to us in the modern age, the scale of what this really means. In the ancient world, the earth was the center of the universe, and the stars were, just kind of tiny parts of reality. The modern view is the stars and the rest of the universe are a very large part of reality. Earth is just a speck. So it's a big deal when you see the rest of the universe starting to show signs of ripping apart. And that's how I interpret this passage. I mean, there are what they call the preterists and the amillennialists or whatever. I said, where in history has anything like this happened? Where have we heard the entire world, all the mighty and all the lowlies, saying, let the rocks fall on us for the wrath of the Lamb, to protect us from the wrath of the Lamb? This tells me the world will recognize that this prophecy of the Christian God, and also this powerful display of his power. Now, in the days of Elijah, he was contesting with King Ahab. Elijah would work these miracles, bringing fire down on people, and then that incident where fire burned up the offering. And for a while, people would reverence God. It didn't last long. In the case of the book of Revelation, kind of the same story will play out. God will work some mighty miracle, they'll bow down, and then they'll just go back to their sinful ways, just like in the Old Testament. Of course, it's multiplied. After this event, sometime after, I think it's in Revelation 11, there are two witnesses who will appear, and they will also call fire down from heaven and inflict all sorts of plagues. And then the Antichrist will come and kill them, and the Antichrist will rule. Now, if that sounds far-fetched, how much more far-fetched is this than invoking multiple universes? I just need to throw that out there first. And I earlier pointed out the existence of God in some interpretations of quantum mechanics is indicated. So, why did this topic come up to me? I said, well, one, I have been talking about young Earth creationism. But you see, if you're an old Earth creationist and you're invoking and you're reading this passage like I have, I'm just inviting you to consider, how is it that you could see all these events from distant parts of the universe and you're seeing it happen? That would, to me, suggest that light could travel very much faster out there in space for some reason. Now, this will, raise questions in terms of physics. I have some ideas, and I might cover that in future shows, some of the mechanics of this. And I might want to, again, just highlight kind of the more top tier creationists who you don't hear about, like Philip Dennis and John Gideon Hartnett, and maybe a few others that really are qualified to at least weigh in on this. They may not have the answer yet, but they're qualified to at least come up with some ideas and maybe get us closer to figuring out how this could be. And but what triggered this? I was in my regular Friday night apologetics meeting, and one of the gentlemen in the meeting shared what's going on as far as what they call globalism. There was a conference that talked about globalism at Regents University, and the dean of that school is the Honorable Michelle Bachmann, who's Congresswoman Bachmann. And there was a investigative reporter named Leo Hohmann. And my jaw dropped. In the book of Revelation, it talks about a one world government where the Antichrist will have the power to forbid you to buy or sell and do commerce. And the way that this is implemented is people are required to give obedience to the Antichrist, to get a mark on their right hand or their forehead. What Leo Hohmann found out was there are plans to build these computer chips that will be inserted in your hand or on your head to track you. It can be used like a credit card. It can be used to control your ability to conduct commerce. So just like it's not well known, Joe Biden passed some sort of executive order or authorized the creation of digital dollars. Digital dollars, they'll be able to know your spending activities, who you did business, where, and when. That also means if the government doesn't like you, they can freeze your ability to do commerce. That gave me a lot of fear and trembling. That means if the government doesn't like that you're protesting their policies, they can decide, oh, you're an enemy of the state, we'll shut your banks down. So when the truckers were protesting in Canada, I think over the vaccine, the government just contacted the banks and the banks froze their accounts. The protests ended. So the government has found a way to partner also with private industry to limit your freedoms, to control your life. They were also talking about re-engineering the human body to be more machine, and that they felt that they could reprogram your minds. This is very, very scary. Does that sound conspiratorial? Well, let me just say, throughout human history, we've known tyrants wish to make themselves like God, control people's lives, and enslave them to their own whims. We still see this on full display even in this modern day, supposed civilized world. And there's some people who feel it is their right to impose their will on the rest of the world, to get to control them the way that they see fit, the way that they define their morals and what they think is right. It's going to be scary. Now, I'll point out, I'm definitely a capitalist, and there's been a fight in Christianity against communism, and I'm all for that. Because communism is an evil system. Just look at Venezuela or North Korea or the old Soviet Union. But if you look at the book of Revelation, It describes the system of Babylon, the great prostitute. She is a system of commerce, because when she is destroyed in just 1 hour, all the merchants of the earth will lament, because by her, they got very, very rich through trade. And so that, what Leo Hohmann called the Fourth Reich, which is an extension of Hitler's Third Reich, he said this will be a system that's intended to make you think you're free when you're actually enslaved. And he highlights all the ways that the globalists are intending to remove your freedoms. He highlights the fact all this advocacy of electric cars, these car-free Sundays, which means, by the way, you don't go to church on Sunday, just open assault on Christianity. All the disruption of the supply chains, all of these things are attacks on our freedom and paving the way for the Antichrist. And I was in such despair last night. I said, what, Lord, what are we going to do? Whether you're pre-tribber or post-tribber or whatever, life could get pretty bad. Life could still get pretty bad before the Lord returns. However you interpret the scriptures, and I respect all the viewpoints. I just wanted to let you know what mine is. Life could get pretty bad, and I was despairing. But then I realized God will show that he's in control before all this comes down. Before the Antichrist takes power, before all these scary things that Leo Hohmann is describing of all the tyrannical forces that are seeking to destroy your freedoms. And if you think I'm kidding, if you think that I'm just making up the idea that they're tyrants who will claim that they're going to give you utopia and their false promises, and then they take the country into ruin, look at Venezuela. So many of the places tyrannical leadership touches, they're able to draw people to themselves and grab power and make life pretty miserable. And now we have lots of technology to do that. Look at what's happening to our country in the last couple of years, for example. It's terrible. Look at Portland. Goodness, look at all the violence in the streets. These criminals being let out on bail, our borders not being secure, and all the corrupt politicians just getting away with all their crimes. It doesn't have to be a conspiracy. It's just human nature for people in power to abuse it. And now they have the technological means. And it was easy for me to get feel despair. And I said, Lord, can you give some encouragement? And I realized before all this comes down to where the Antichrist has so much power, God will let his people know. God will let his people know that the Christian God is in control. He'll shake up the entire universe. See, the devil can't do that. Only God can. Only God can. And God will do things to indicate, even while all these evil forces are trying to ascend to control in the world, he'll leave reminders for his people that the Christian God is going to win this. It'll be difficult. So one of those is the sign of the stars falling toward Earth. And I said, if that happens, this will give us, ironically, a mechanism to solve the distant starlight problem of young Earth creationism, if you're open to that idea. So I'm just saying, okay, if you're an old Earth creationist, and this is what I began to think about as I shifted from old Earth creationism to young Earth. I said, what about the end of the cosmos? And I said, yeah, There's high-speed transport of light. And as I said, I'm interested in this. I've seen it now starting to creep into the secular mainstream, the possibility that light can move very, very fast. The term that Jao Miguejo uses is, he calls it zippy light. He's a professor of general relativity at, I think it's Imperial College in London. And more people, including Lisa Randall at Harvard, physicist Lisa Randall, have put forward variable speed of light theories. Now, each one has a different mechanism, but it's the general idea light can travel fast. And I said, this seems to also accord with Revelation chapter 6 and the stars falling toward the earth, moving toward the earth. We might see that. So, we do have a lot of assurance that God is in control because of the fact of creation. So if you believe in intelligent design, you know that a power far greater than us created the universe because it's finely tuned. It looks very well engineered with the strong impression that whatever the source of the universe was, it had us in mind. It had us in mind because only, of all the possible universes that could come to be, if the parameters were just a little different, there wouldn't even be atoms, much less life. But there are atoms, atoms of the whole periodic table, and there is life. And the probability of this, of a universe that is habitable, is very improbable. And it suggests a creator. But whoever created it also must be incredibly powerful to be able to build galaxies and stars. And this indicates to me, as I studied the matter, that the galaxies and stars were specially created. They were not evolved either. Power of that scale will dwarf anything on Earth. So even if human tyrants may control some of the commerce here on Earth, they don't control the universe. God controls the universe, and God controls where it's going. God will control Judgment Day. And Jesus said, do not fear what man can do to you. It's God who has power to throw you into hell. So those are mostly my thoughts. I think I wrote S.J. Tomlinson, and I suspect she has similar views to mine on eschatology. She's the one that told me about transhumanism. Before I talk a little more about, before I close, I should mention when I was at MITRE Corporation, I briefly had, very, very much in passing, a little work with their nanomolecular systems group, James Ellenbogen. And amazingly, my high school physics teacher was actually employed in that group. James Ellenbogen, I want to express respect for him for considering me, giving me the privilege of briefly, participating in his group on a volunteer basis. While I was also, he was an employee of MITRE, so was I, but I volunteered my personal time to work with him. And it was actually listed in my in my performance evaluation from my employer that I worked with him. And Dr. Ellenbogen said, death will be obsolete someday. He is apparently among those who believe we can make death obsolete by merging humans with machines. And in the link in the video description to Leo Hohmann's talk, very disturbing what they are saying. They are claiming that, we will intelligently design our destiny. We will recreate life. And they just came short of saying, we're going to be like God. That's what they're trying to do. And S.J. Tomlinson was describing some very disturbing developments where they may try to force people to have their bodies re-engineered to accomplish this. There are a lot of people in Google, they call it they're called singularitarians. You can look this up. It's a movement to do this. It's like, this is all very scary. And so we may talk about this. And the point is that this was all, this aligns with a lot of prophecy in the book of Revelation. In this channel, we cover evidence and reasons for the Christian faith. I just want those who are maybe on the fence to consider, okay, if you're an agnostic, do you see where humanity is headed? Not only are our genomes deteriorating, our civilization is, the freedoms. It's going to look like the Orwellian world of 1984 that George, after that book, or Huxley's Brave New World. It's what they call a dystopia. Where is humanity headed? What are you living for? At the very least, if these forces are so grievous and dark, I invite you to consider to look for hope in the true paradise of God, which is in Jesus Christ, because history has shown human leaders and men and their plans and their schemes often disappoint. And now in the era of high technology and nuclear weapons, we've just multiplied the power to really disappoint and make miserable the human race. Secondly, and more importantly, the Bible prophesied that this is what's going to happen. God is letting humans demonstrate to themselves that they're incapable of being God. They're incapable of building paradise. They're incapable of being their own saviors. Only God is the savior. And I think that's the message. So I'm covering this to say, this looks like evidence to me that the Bible is true. And it's also reasons to consider the Christian faith, if for no other reason that I think humanity's offering a lot of dead ends at this point, and it's looking really bad. We need, more so than at any time in history, I think, miracles of God in our life to sustain us and to encourage us and to give us hope. So with that, Lord willing, I'll see you all again. I didn't cover quite as much as I wanted to, and that's okay, maybe in another show. As always, especially when I'm doing a solo show like this, I don't have a chance to look through all the comments. I want to thank everyone who is here. And I'm sorry I didn't get to them. So since I see that the side chat is lit up, let me at least look through some of this, because I sense the comments are interesting, and maybe I'll try to answer some, or comment on some of the things I've seen in the side chat. So, and also a chance to greet some of the people here. So give me a moment here, and I'll get to the side chat. Mark O'Connell, God bless you. Good to see you. Wesley Coleman, great to see you. And what I'll do is I'll even just acknowledge you all here. Thank you, Wesley. Thank you, Mark. God, teach me to pray your word. Computer in the EU nicknamed the beast. Yeah. Let me point out something. The culture has gotten so scary bad. They're openly blaspheming the Christian God, and they're delighting in it. People are identifying themselves as Satanists and pagans more so than I've ever seen. They're eager to desecrate the Christian faith. Simultaneously, when I read the Old Testament in the book of Revelation, just like in the Old Testament, when things were really bad with Ahab and Jezebel, God was also working some of his greatest miracles with Elijah. So in the darkest times, sometimes God's light shines brightest. And I'm feeling that may be the case. Also in the modern day, when things are looking so bad, look how the discipline of intelligent design is flourishing, and how evolutionary theory, and especially abiogenesis theory, is just falling apart. So God has a way of helping us when we're in need. Let me see if I can keep getting some of this working. The buttons here are a little bit challenging. A historist view of these signs, which was the Protestant understanding of prophecy, a day for a year and events occurring throughout the whole history. Okay, and Holy Eucharistic. Also, another YouTube channel I would recommend, Church of the Eternal Logos. He talks about transhumanism as well. Holy Entertainment. I'd like to welcome you to the channel. Thank you. If I haven't seen you before, thank you for visiting. Jamie Russell, good to see you. Matthew Atkinson's here. Stars falling could just be a huge meteor storm. I really want to acknowledge that as a possibility, but let me just point this out. How big a sign would it take? Okay, if we get a meteor storm, yeah, that might cause everyone powerful and, the generals, the leaders, the mighty, and then the slave and free to kneel. But if you start to see the laws of physics across the universe and the fabric of space being ripped apart, I think that would cause everyone to briefly kneel and plead for mercy. So it could be any number of things, but that's worth exploring. So I just want to acknowledge that. Thank you for that suggestion. Iger Television, greetings. And Pigs Can Fly. Always great to see you, Matt. And please say hi to Mrs. Pigs Can Fly too. Yep. There's lots of that. And Lord help us all. As I said, now I will just briefly touch on my eschatological views. I'm not committed to one view because I don't know. I only have my intuitions, which I've shared today. But I put in the video description Michael Brown and Craig Keener's book. And it had a beautiful passage, independent of the chronology and the details. It's just an encouragement for Christians. When Jesus taught us to pray, he said, the first thing we say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And those words mean more to me now than ever. The significance that is. Usually when we pray, we're asking for our will to be done. Okay, we don't explicitly say that, but we're saying, God, we want this. Make it happen, please. And, I think that's great. You go to the Lord and say, this is what I want. Can you help me? I think that's fair. But God wants your priority, the priority to be when you pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. His kingdom in the book of Revelation, that is describing how his kingdom is arriving and taking control of reality, and that his priority is that his will be done. It's only later in the Lord's Prayer it says, give us this day our daily bread, where we put our needs and wants before the Lord after his will is done. And so, I will close this show by saying that, by offering that prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. And with that, have a good evening, everybody. God bless you.